let's have about 20 minutes or so to reflect a bit more on the learnings that we have from the case studies, and particularly also on the opportunities and conditions for promoting these decision support tools in the next programming period. So we will have a couple of questions to each of the presenters, and at the end we also have an opportunity for everybody to talk or to discuss if we manage the time well. So let's start with a question to Carla on the IOI Matrix. So given that the IOI Matrix relies a lot on expert judgment and also the importance of transparency and consistency in qualitative tools, how could these elements be strengthened in the next programming period? Also to ensure that the different expert groups apply comparable criteria or scoring approaches. What would be your ideas?
Yeah, thank you, Simona. So I think that what we're seeing in the Tools4CAP consortium is that there are large differences between the member states on how much researchers are involved in the programming and also in touch with the ministries. And I think that we have in those contexts where there is already a lot of connection between like long-standing research support for the programming. I think that there it's like very easy to get in there, but I think especially with the loss of many, like with the loss of the SWOT analysis, the need assessment, the ex-ante evaluation, I think a lot of those, institutionalized support mechanisms are not there anymore. And so I think it is more than ever important to have these tools that we also provide to give to researchers to also proactively be in touch with the ministries to provide support. So I think that is something that we've definitely seen in our example, for example, that the tool really helped to create a structured and transparent dialogue between researchers and policymakers, and that also is an opportunity to get input from stakeholders. So I think maybe that's it from my side on this question.
Sorry, I muted my microphone. Thanks a lot for this explanation, Carla. So based on these experience, what do you think, how could the qualitative insights generated from the IOI Matrix be more systematically translated into concrete, let's say, CSP decisions, or in the future NRPP decisions? So for example, intervention choices or justification elements?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what we also saw throughout the different examples that were presented today, I think that, for example, the if the IOI Matrix is also based on or like fed by a process maybe through a prioritization tool, or then also fed into what Trevor presented with the intervention logic, I think that these tools can very much help to provide justifications for interventions, because they show very clearly what the impact is, how they can contribute to the objectives that are set. And I think something that we, for example, also learned from the German context is that there is so much evaluation data, but it needs to be fed into the process. And I think that's like where these tools can actually help also synthesize the knowledge that has already been gathered to the funding periods of the past, to make very evidence-based and also data-based decisions for what interventions actually work in the regional context and what don't. I think that for the IOI Matrix, I think, especially also the uptake data can really give like informed regional choices of what interventions makes sense. And so I think if through these tools, there can be communication with the ministries and the policy decision makers on what works in the regional context, then I think, yeah, that can just really help to inform policy decisions and create concrete outcomes.
Yeah, thank you, Carla. With this, I would ask the next question to Trevor, because Barbara shortly disappeared, so I wasn't sure if you're there, but I think it connects really well. So in terms of the intervention logic, Trevor, and looking ahead of the next programming period, what aspects of the intervention logic process would most benefit from clearer structure or methodological guidance based on experience in Ireland to also uptake this in the next programming period? You're muted, Trevor. Maybe you unmute yourself.
No, I'm just asking you, can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, so the question is, what kind of in the process of the intervention logic, which element would benefit most from clearer structure or methodological guidance so that it's able to be uptaken in the next programming period?
Okay. I suppose one area there might be, I suppose, better guidance for people developing an intervention logic on how to deal with the whole issue of policy overlaps, where more than one policy seems to contribute to the same objective, or maybe how to explore better where policies are generating trade-offs, where a particular policy seems to be improving one CAP objective, but possibly having adverse consequences for another CAP objective. Trying to explore how best to capture that type of information as part of the intervention logic process, I think would be useful.
Okay, thanks a lot for that insight. And then you also highlighted that there are data gaps and limitations in existing indicators. What improvements in data collection and indicator design would be needed in the next program period to more accurately monitor the impact of the interventions, for example?
Yeah, I think we could probably do more in terms of data integration, for sure. And you can see some of that idea coming across now in the new Farm Sustainability Data Network, which is giving liaison agencies powers to collect more data, or at least to get access to more data held by the ministry, maybe for administrative purposes. The idea is to, I suppose, leverage as much as possible of the data that's in existence, so that it could be used for purposes associated with monitoring and evaluation. One of the difficulties I think we have with this process overall to this point is that there tends to be maybe an over-reliance on data that's conveniently available, which may not always be the ideal type of data that you would want to have in order to measure something. And I guess another aspect associated with all that is if we could get data on a more timely basis, so that we could potentially even look at using evidence from data to adjust policy that we might conclude aren't working as was intended based on the original intervention logic. But that I think is seems to be a particularly challenging one, because there are all kinds of impediments there, ranging from resourcing issues to fundamental issues about the way particular pieces of data are collected, and there's a lot of heterogeneity that around Europe as well. You know, if we want to contrast Europe or the EU, I should say, with say the United States, where you know it's a single country, so the way in which their data collected is more homogeneous. Whereas in the EU, we have, I suppose, requirements in the end to supply data which has particular definitions, but how that data is gathered and how quickly it's gathered can vary across the member states, meaning that you probably have different levels and qualities of data available in some member states on which to perform evaluations than you do in others.
Yeah, so that's something we also can put into our main recommendations from the project, probably. There have already been quite a lot of mentions of the timeliness of applying the different methods. And with this, I also want to hand over to Barbara. Your case study recommends institutionalizing the participatory prioritization early on in the CSP design process, also to avoid symbolic consultation. So what would be needed to embed this approach structurally so that it has a real influence in the policy process? What would you think, or what would you recommend?
Thank you. This is a very important and relevant question, especially when we are facing this change in planning the whole process and this national and regional partnership plans where we still don't know, especially for rural areas, where there will be actually. So first of all, this is at the member state level to really ensure that all the actors are involved and that rural areas and rural needs are not from one ministry to the other as a hot potato, and that there is this balance between agricultural functions of rural areas and other functions of rural areas. So first of all, really the stakeholders and the representativeness and balance of powers has to be really mapped because what we see in many cases, not only in Poland, is that the ministries generally turn for consultations to organizations they know for decades, and they may not be the really strong representatives of rural areas and agriculture these days. So upgraded social network mapping and analysis and ego-centric and network analysis so that we really know with whom to talk to make the best of it and to really ensure that the needs of different stakeholders groups at different levels of geography in each member state are represented. So I think that based on what we know at this moment for the future of the whole cohesion policy and CAP policies is the need to really advocate for including these issues of consultations, participatory approach in EU regulations, so that member states really have to show that they did this during their planning of NRPPs. So I think this is at this moment, this is what needs to be done to make sure that in all member states we really have all the key stakeholders really involved in the process and co-designing this process and co-owning this process. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara. So from that, you also concluded in the case study that there is a need for capacity building or for facilitators and stakeholder representatives. But on the other hand, we also want a long-term integration and of the prioritization tools with quantitative monitoring data. So from your perspective, how could those two elements be strengthened in the next programming period so that on one hand, stakeholder perceptions are more effectively connected with measurable policy outcomes? Well,
I think that for the beginning, really, it was also the conclusion from our focus group that we conducted at the beginning of March this year, when we in Poland tried to also have some inputs and reflections on the proposals of the European Commission for the next programming periods, and at the same time for prioritization tool we used in our case study. So the conclusion was that at early stage, member states really have to decide who is responsible for which chapters of the NRPPs, and at the same time also to verify what tools were used for this programming period by different ministries, and how this can be improved, work on, used by other ministries that don't have this capacity to use these tools, and how this can be made together. But this really has to start now to ensure that the capacity of different stakeholders involved at the level of designing the ministries designing the NRPPs is the same, and that the weaker links don't lose, and thus the representative stakeholders that are represented by these ministries don't lose in this game for the money that is not ring-fenced. This was the greatest fear of our focus group, and the greatest recommendation to do this really early on, to ensure that the tools are there, and that the stakeholders that should be involved are also ready to participate in the process. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. Now to conclude the roundtable, I would like to ask some questions to all of you. So first of all, of course, to our presenters, but also to all the participants. We have presented today a couple of participatory and decision-making tools that we have been working on in the Tools4CAP project. We know, of course, there are more, and we also have worked on a couple more in the project, but of course, there's still a broader range of other tools existing and also applied in some countries. If we are now looking towards the new programming period, and with all the uncertainty that there still is, which of the tools that we presented today, and also which other tools that you might be aware of, would you recommend for the application or for the use in the next programming period, or the design of the programming period? Maybe we can use the chat for, the hand raising, if there is contributions from anyone. But first of all, I hand the floor to our three presenters, maybe to just give a short feedback or answer to this question. Trevor, you can start, yeah. But you're still muted. Share your voice with us.
I have to say that I thought the cumulative voting approach is quite an interesting one. I think one of the challenges at times when different interest groups are setting out their objectives or what they would like to see the CAP achieving, it can be very difficult to get some of them to list what their priorities are, because in some cases these are almost like negotiating positions. So everything in terms of their objectives is equally important, it seems, at times. Whereas I think we know that a negotiated outcome between different interest groups usually involves having to concede on some of the objectives that your interest group personally had. So I think the cumulative voting is an interesting approach in that sense, for trying to extract from stakeholders what they consider to be the most important things ultimately, to try to deliver something that I guess satisfies as many of the goals that the different interest groups might have in the end, and to do that in a relatively kind of transparent way. And it also forces, I think, the participants to the process to actually rank in order of importance what they want the CAP to actually achieve. I think it's too simplistic to arrive at a negotiation with an argument that all of your objectives must be met, because I think what we realize is that some of these objectives may conflict with the objectives of other interest groups, and there are finite resources in the end, and that may even be a more acute problem in the next CAP round. So I liked the cumulative voting approach for those reasons.
Thank you, Trevor. And then Barbara, yeah.
Thank you. So coming to the continuing in a way what Trevor said, for me a big concern is we saw this in CAP strategic plans in federalized countries, that the voices from the regions were somehow lost or not well expressed during preparation of national CAP strategic plans. And for this new approach with national regional partnership plans, there is also this fear that some regional perspectives, regional specific needs, like some sectors of agriculture being more developed in one region than the others, can be lost during this cumulative voting approach. So I think that there have to be some tweaks made in this process to really ensure that the specificities, regional specificities and specific needs are still there, so that we ensure a bit of money to these specific needs, because this can really endanger the development of specific regions that are different than the others in certain senses, in certain characteristics. So I think this is very important also for researchers to advocate the needs of the smallest, more specific needs and groups of sectors in agriculture, for example, or regions with very specific needs, to really not to be lost during these cumulative voting processes and the negotiations of rural CAP chapters with other chapters of national regional partnership plans. So I think this is very important to take care of this issue at the design process of the whole design of these plans. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. Are there more perspectives on this question of which of the tools that we presented or other participatory and decision support tools you know of would be most relevant in the upcoming design process? Yeah, Trevor.
I might just come back in,
yeah.
and talk a little bit about the intervention logic that I presented. I guess if I was to be critical of intervention logic in some aspect, it might be that it could be perceived as being quite academic by some stakeholders, and perhaps a bit jargony as well. Like if you start a discussion about an intervention logic, and the first thing you do is you show them what a completed intervention logic might look like. It looks like a circuit board for an old television or something like that. So it is a lot to try to grasp. And then you also have the issue of introducing terminology that maybe some stakeholders might be unfamiliar with. You start talking about the concept of output and impact and results indicators, and once you start to do that, you could potentially be at the risk of alienating some of the stakeholders who might perceive it as being too dense or too abstract an approach to deal with. So in that regard, maybe IOI Matrix is probably maybe perhaps a simpler concept for everybody to embrace. So that's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. And then I hand over to Carla for the last time, and then I think we have to come to an end in the discussion.
Yeah, I think I want to connect to what Trevor and Barbara both said, and just bring up the point that I think what we could could learn from the experience in Germany is that there needs to be tools to structure the creation of political will, to foster a dialogue between the stakeholders, to kind of like get their priorities clear. And I think what we learned, especially from our focus group as well, is that that's like one part of the stakeholder involvement, and then one is also to have a more formal possibility of voicing inputs, or like have a more formalized way of actually having input into the creation of policies. And so I think for that, I also want to make the case for a more structured approach to include stakeholders in the process. So I think but if I look at the part of fostering discussion, I actually think that the IOI Matrix can be very helpful to, for example, have the possibility of co-creating objectives or prioritizing objectives for the process, and then have a part where more based on expert knowledge, the matrix is actually populated. So yeah, just want to make that case. Thank you, Simona.
Yeah, thank you, Carl. I think that was a good point at the end, which I also wanted to emphasize, that we have to really focus also on the process design and the importance of transparency in the design and clarification of roles and responsibilities. So that is also something that we want to emphasize.